How's it going, guys? So there's a fight coming up in Germany next month that I think is a very interesting matchup, and it's in the light heavyweight division. Now, this fight's going to be between Mehdi Amar, and he's going to be defending his European light heavyweight title against former two-time WBO super middleweight champion Robert Stieglitz. Now, for those of you who don't know who Mehdi Amar is, he's a fighter from France. The majority of his fights, in fact, I think all but one of his fights so far have been in France. And he has the record that kind of looks like it's a borderline journeyman record. He has lost to people that I've seen many people get by. For example, he lost to Mehdi over in France for the French super middleweight title. Mehdi Bouadler, those of you who don't know who he is, he's the first fighter to ever go the distance with Gennady Golovkin. He has also been around for a very long time. He's fought people like Mikhail Kessler and Arthur Abraham. I've seen him fight live several times. And yeah, he's a journeyman, but he's a very tough, durable journeyman. This guy also got stopped by Najib Mohammadi. He's a guy he's one of these overused opponents. And he lost a wide decision against Hassan Endam too. So, he's very well known over in France. A lot of the French fighters like Endam and Bouadler, the guys around the top at European level in France have fought this guy. And the majority of them have either beaten him or drew with him. So it has to be said that he's not really an elite fighter. He's just a European level fighter. But in his most recent fights, and I've watched his most recent fights on YouTube, and he does seem to be slightly improved to me. I think that he's a lot better now than he was back when he fought people like Endam and Bouadler. I think that his skills have come together nicely. And, he's an interesting addition to the division. He's not an easy fight for anybody. Now, Robert Stieglitz, for those of you who don't know, Robert Stieglitz, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, when he was super middleweight champion, and he was champion for a long time, he was one of the most avoided and underrated fighters in that division, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people didn't think very highly of Stieglitz. They saw him as pretty much a paper champion. People heard that he got stopped against people like Alejandro Barrio and Andrade, who world-class super middleweights like Mikhail Kessler were able to defeat. However, Mikhail Kessler and Lucien Bute, that is, they defeated those guys. But to be honest, Robert Stieglitz, when he fought those guys, I think that he was a little bit too reckless. See, because the thing with Robert Stieglitz, he's one of these fighters who, he's got boxing skill and he's got defense and he knows what he's doing in there. However, he tends to fight with a chip on his shoulder. Robert Stieglitz, to me, he's very similar to Amir Khan in a way. He's a guy who he would be, because he has great hand speed, great athleticism, very fast, very fit, can throw so many punches, was a very good athlete. And, he gave all that up by becoming an aggressive fighter and fighting with anger in the ring. He's a very emotional fighter. He's a guy who gets caught in the heat of battle and, wants to stand and slug it out. And that's really been to his detriment. That's what led to him eventually losing his title. But while he was champion, he was heavily avoided. And I'll give you an example of how avoided this guy was. Lucien Bute flat out avoided the fight with Robert Stieglitz. There were actually talks, and I remember seeing an interview with Lucien Bute's trainer at the time, and I can't seem to find the interview. I tried to find it, but I seen it several years ago, and it was Lucien Bute's trainer talking about we refused to fight Robert Stieglitz because we refused to fight in Germany. However, from reports that I heard, was that Robert Stieglitz was willing to actually travel for the fight. And he would have been more than willing to go over to Canada and fight Lucien Bute, but for whatever reason, Lucien Bute just refused to negotiate the fight. Also, for those of you who don't know, Robert Stieglitz, on 2 occasions, was set to fight Mikhail Kessler in Denmark, and both times Mikhail Kessler pulled out, claiming that he was injured. However, it was very dodgy, the situation surrounding him pulling out, because, Mikhail Kessler, I remember, from what I remember, he pulled out of the Stieglitz fight, and then not long later, he was in the ring with someone else, like very shortly after pulling out of that fight, if I remember rightly. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Alan Green or Mehdi Bouadler or someone like that. It was one of the guys that Mikhail Kessler fought. However, it was very, very close to the date that he was originally set to fight Robert Stieglitz. and maybe it was a legitimate injury, but it happened on 2 occasions. Also, George Groves, and again, a lot of people seem to have forgotten about this, but George Groves was set to fight Robert Stieglitz on 2 occasions in Germany, and he pulled out both times. So Robert Stieglitz was one of the most heavily avoided fighters. In fact, I remember that situation quite clearly. In fact, George Groves was the mandatory for the WBO title. I believe he was with Frank Warren at the time, and Frank Warren, we know he has a lot of pull with the WBO, and he managed to get Groves that #1 ranking. And George Groves, he was set to fight Stieglitz. He was very, confident about the fight. He seemed like he believed he could go out there and win. But then I think it was he said something like he hadn't seen much of Stieglitz. But then after he had watched Stieglitz, we heard reports that he had pulled out with apparently a nose injury. I think he claimed that he'd broke his nose in sparring or something like that. I'm not looking at the reports now. I'm remembering off the top of my head what happened. I just remember Groves was set to take that fight, and the fight was happening, and he ended up pulling out. It was something to do with his nose, like some nose injury. So yeah, Robert Stieglitz, for whatever reason, people didn't seem to want to fight him. Now, his first big fight, his first really big, well-known fight came against Arthur Abraham in 2012, and I remember watching that fight live. It was a fantastic fight. I mean, Arthur Abraham versus Robert Stieglitz was a great 12-round war. It was back and forth. It was very close. It was just such a high-paced, high-action fight, and it was a great event. It was a great card too. I remember that card, and yeah, it was a very close fight. However, Abraham was given a unanimous decision. The fight was in Abraham's hometown in Berlin, so Abraham was then given the. I felt the scores on one of the cards was a little bit too wide. I thought it could have gone either way. I think when I scored it live, I had Stieglitz like 1 point ahead or something like that. It was a very close fight, but Abraham ended up getting the win by a comfortable unanimous decision. And he gave Robert Stieglitz a rematch, and the rematch was in Magdeburg, which is Stieglitz's hometown. And Stieglitz beat the absolute shit out of Arthur Abraham in that fight. Now, one thing that I'd always thought about Arthur Abraham was, it's kind of easy to outbox the guy if you find an exploit. But one thing I never expected was a fighter like Stieglitz, who was not known as being a puncher, to get a stoppage against Abraham. But he did. He beat the shit out of Abraham. He fucked up Abraham's eye. He caused horrible swelling. And then just before the 4th round in the corner, Arthur Abraham's trainer pulled him out because the damage he had taken and the beating that he was taking was just too much. And they were like, you know what, we'll fight on another day. So, yeah, Robert Stieglitz had his biggest victory there, and he is the only guy, the first and only guy to ever get a stoppage victory against Arthur Abraham. And to me, I think that's a great achievement because Arthur Abraham is a hard bastard. Okay, he's a hard man, a very tough, very durable man that nobody else has been able to stop. Okay, Andre Ward couldn't stop him. Carl Froch couldn't stop him. Andrew Durrell couldn't stop him. Gilberto Ramirez couldn't stop him. Martin Murray couldn't stop him. None of those guys that got in the ring with Abraham, none of them were able to stop him. So the fact that Robert Stieglitz was able to get an early stoppage victory against Abraham is extremely commendable. I don't think anybody can really downplay that. Of course, they had a third fight, and again, it was a very close fight. However, that time, going into the last round, it was very close. And then Abraham actually scored a knockdown in the last round and secured himself a split decision victory. It was very close on the cards. It was a split decision that time. And then Robert Stieglitz, he went on to fight Felix Sturm, and it was a great fight, guys. If you haven't seen that fight, check it out. It was a great back and forth war. Very, very close. Could have gone either way. It was scored a draw by the judges. I personally, when I watched it the first time, I think I had Sturm just edging the fight, only just. But I'm a Felix Sturm fan, so maybe I'm a little bit biased there. But I thought he won the fight just. I felt that he landed the more, just the more accurate punches, even though Stieglitz might have landed more. I felt that Sturm's punches, there was more quality behind them and more accuracy. But yeah, great fight. However, those fights that Robert Stieglitz had in his career, and I'll get to the point because it's significant towards this prediction. Those fights took a lot out of Stieglitz. They took so much out of him. You know, when you're a fighter who fights with a chip on your shoulder and who fights aggressively and who consistently takes hard fights and you know doesn't back down in the ring, you know, it takes a lot out of you. It really does. Takes away your reflexes, takes away your energy. You know, having to go through grueling training camps to fight a grueling fight. You know, fighters like that don't tend to last long. And Robert Stieglitz, because of those fights, he was not the same. And we saw in the fourth Arthur Abraham fight, because he fought Arthur Abraham a fourth time, Stieglitz was a shadow of his former self in that fight. He was done, completely done. You know, he didn't have the energy that he had before, didn't have the chin, no longer had that high volume, could no longer keep up with the pace of the fight, or could no longer handle the power, and he ended up getting stopped in 6 rounds. So that was kind of sad, you know, kind of disappointing, because he was always able to compete with Abraham, or even beat Abraham, because I mean, you could make a case for him winning the first fight and the second fight, which he won by stoppage. But in that sixth fight, Stieglitz just wasn't himself. You know, Abraham, I felt, is made of the tough stuff. You know, he's a guy who was durable enough to endure what happened in the previous fights without being completely washed up. But Stieglitz, to me, you know, he just isn't the same fighter anymore, and that's why now that he's in the light heavyweight division and he's going to be challenging for the European title against this dude, I don't think it's an easy fight for Stieglitz, because Stieglitz doesn't have light heavyweight power, let's be honest. As I said, he's past his prime now, so, you know, Mehdi Amar, he could be taking this fight at the very right time. You know, that's one thing we can say about him, is that Mehdi Amar, you know, if ever was a time to fight Robert Stieglitz, that time is now. So, yeah, you know, I think this is a good fight. I think it's going to be entertaining. The fight's in Germany. I believe it's going to be taking place in Magdeburg, which is Robert Stieglitz's hometown. And Robert Stieglitz is from Russia, by the way, but he's predominantly based in Germany. That's where he's fought the majority of his career. So, and he lives in Magdeburg. So that basically is hometown advantage for him. And I think that in Magdeburg, you know, he's going to have a lot of support, and it's going to help him to have the crowd behind him and stuff. But you never know, because at this stage of a fighter's career, when they've been through so many hard, grueling fights, you just never know. Now, from what I see from Amar, you know, he's a pretty conventional fighter. You know, he's fundamentally sound. He's got a decent jab, a decent counter right hand. I've seen him switch his stance every now and then. However, he does it obviously, so you know, he doesn't really confuse you when he does it, because he doesn't really look natural in a southpaw stance to me. But you know, I think that he can box, he can handle himself. But I just think if I was forced to make a pick here, I think that Robert Stieglitz, being in his hometown, him being the better athlete, because I do think even at this stage, I think Robert Stieglitz is a slightly better athlete than this guy. I'm probably going to go with Stieglitz to win on points. So yeah, that's my decision. I'm going to go with Stieglitz to win a wide decision. However, every now and then Amar will have his moments, because I think that Stieglitz, you know, just doesn't really have the energy that he used to have. So, you know, let me know what you guys think. I'm excited to watch this fight. It's going to be fun to watch. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.